after Trump's threatening to impose these huge tariffs, I think we will see recalibration of supply chains in the whole region. We will see acceleration of decreasing reliance by international companies on China, diversification, and a lot of other dynamics. How do you see these things?
Thank you, Ahmed. I think this conference cannot take place at a better time. It's just in the aftermath of the results of the US presidential election. Now, also allow me to congratulate Donald Trump for being elected in such a decisive win in domestic politics in the United States. And now the Republican Party is in control not only of the White House, but also of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, and President Trump and the Republican Party probably have greater influence at the Supreme Court level and other federal court levels. So I think in the coming 4 years, starting on January the 20th, President Trump will shake up the United States as well as shake up the world. And most of us are holding our breath as to see what President Trump will do or will not do. As far as China-US relations are concerned, Donald Trump has threatened to go maximum in terms of imposing tariffs on Chinese export to the United States. But allow me to mention one thing. Trump never tells the American people who pays these tariffs. China doesn't pay any single penny of the tariffs imposed by the United States on Chinese export to the United States. The tariffs, whether 25% or 50% or 60%, or as threatened up to 100% for the EV cars, are paid in its entirety by the American people. The high tariffs imposed on Chinese exports to the United States is one of the reasons why inflation runs high in the United States, and high inflation erodes the living standards of the American people. In a sense, the higher tariffs imposed by the United States government under President Trump before, now under Biden, and to be imposed again by President Trump, will cause high inflation in the United States. It's not sustainable. Now, Ahmed, you talked about reconfiguring the supply chain. The supply chain is never carved in stone, but Rome is not built overnight. China spent the past 46 years in economic reform, opening to the outside world. So if you really want to change the supply chain, to squeeze China out of the supply chain, you probably need to spend another 46 years to come to change it. And the world is changing. I think the fact that President Xi Jinping keeps talking about the new qualitative productivity, which is a tongue twister in itself, really means China needs to rely on technological breakthrough, on scientific breakthrough to increase, boost its own productivity, and completely changing the ways of doing things in China. From the Chinese perspective, let me tell you how China looks at the world right now. China believes AI revolution is real, and AI revolution will completely shape the world. And the real competition is not between China versus the United States. The real competition is between AI on the one hand, which is changing rapidly, versus Homo sapien. All of us are Homo sapien. So if China and the United States really just compete, especially in the AI sphere, the ultimate winner may not be China or the United States. It may be AI. AI may gain its own independence and its own conscience and subjugate all of us, human beings, as a second-class citizen. What's the fun of that? China and the United States, the two leading countries in AI revolution, eventually need to come to terms with how they need to cooperate rather than confront each other or a zero-sum game to kill each other using AI as the instrument. So from the Chinese perspective, we welcome Donald Trump, and we actually highly appreciate the fact that Donald Trump declared to the world that for the 4 years when he will be the next president of the United States, he will not use war as an instrument to solve any international issues. I hope President Trump will be serious about it. And I would really highly recommend that if he achieves that, he should be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Really, he will really make a very important legacy for mankind if he can prevent the United States from engaging in war, direct or indirect, proxy war of all kinds in the world. So let's wait and see, let's hold our breath to see whether President Trump will really do miracles to preserve peace and avoid using war. Other than that, tariff war, China is very confident. Why? Because if Trump has a way to force China to pay 100%, 60% of the tariffs the US government imposes on China, China will feel the pain. But it's paid by the American consumers. It fuels inflation. So I hope President Trump will really know economics ABC and realize that using tariff can make you happy instantly, but it may deprive you of your sanity in the longer term. Thank you.
That's a very interesting take from a Chinese scholar on Trump. I admit I didn't hear that before, and I think I will keep an eye on this, on the development of this argument.
About China, India, and the United States. I think as far as the United States is concerned, its best case scenario is to tie India onto the American bandwagon of anti-China hostility. Now, for India to be tied on to the US bandwagon of hostility against China would be a nightmare, because China and India each has a population of more than 1.4 billion people, and they are neighbors to each other, thousands of kilometers of common boundary. And if war breaks out between China and India, you are talking about a war involving close to 3 billion people in the world. There will be no more peace for the rest of the world. And I always tell my Indian friends, and I have high admiration for India as a nation, the worst enemy of India is not China. The worst enemy of India from a war perspective, and we have Colonel Zhou, formerly with the PLA in China, the worst enemy for India in terms of war is the Himalayas, because New Delhi is only about several hundred kilometers away from the mighty Himalayas. The Himalayas rises up from low altitude all the way to about 7,000 meters, if not 8,000 meters above sea level. Now, in any warfare, and I'm not a military expert by any stretch of the imagination, you always capture the high ground, you capture the peak, etc. So, from the Indians' perspective, if you want to fight a war against China, China is not your enemy. The Himalaya will be your enemy because you are shooting all the way to the sky as if, and if you cross the Himalaya, it's not plains, it's not lower altitude plains. You are talking about the Tibetan plateau, thousands of kilometers to the north. So you are talking about a military impossibility if you are talking about the war between China and India. Now, if the United States, and I hope not under President Trump, of course, encourages India to fight a war against China, you need to overcome the mighty Himalayas. You travel throughout the world, you travel throughout the Arab Peninsula, etc. You see no such terrain as you have to confront the mighty Himalayas. So, for China and the Indian people, the two superpopulations, let's talk about peace. And we keep talking about these territorial disputes between China and India. The China-Indian disputes were not created by India, and they were not created by China. Who created these territorial disputes? The British colonists, when they ruled India in the form of British Indian Empire. And neither China nor India should be held hostage by the British Indian colonists who want to push the boundary of India into Tibet, into Xinjiang, into many other directions, etc. And the Indian people should never expect that you can achieve goals laid out by the British Indian colonists, that the British Indian colonists failed to achieve in their own way. So let's talk about peace rather than war between China and India. That's the only right way for these two great nations.
Mr. Joshi, please.
Yeah, just a quick corrective. You see, the conflict between India and China, see, the military conflict is, I would push that to the side. There are other problems too between China and India. And trade, yes, is a region where there's a problem. India's trade with China is hugely unbalanced. It is not the kind of trade which can continue forever. And one of the pressure points between India and China always has been the kinds of barriers which China keeps putting up to exclude certain kinds of trade with India. And that's a problem which most of the world has with China. So there India does make common cause with a lot of other similar countries who are in the same dilemma, which includes countries in Europe, which includes the United States of America. We have a problem. We have a trade problem with China. It's an uncontrollable surplus. It is a one-way trade which just keeps on burgeoning, growing and growing, and the kind of dumping which starts taking place. As China gets into a situation where they have tremendous overcapacity, when this keeps trying to flood markets, it does have an effect on the Indian economy. So that is the second leg of the problem we have with China, and many other countries have that problem.
Final one, and please.
I'll be very quick.
Yeah, very brief. Because
I'll be very quick. While I have high admiration for India, as I mentioned, back in 1978, in terms of the size of the economy, China and India were more or less at par with each other. But today, China is completely different from India. The size of the Chinese economy is more than 5 India combined. That means India is less than 20% of the Chinese economy. So, talking about China and India, China must have done something tremendously right over the past 46 years to really leap forward ahead of India as a size of the economy. And I hope Indian friends will really catch up. And eventually, China and India will be in the top 3 largest economies in the world. The sooner India achieve that goal, the happier I will become.
The US economy is far larger compared to China. But if you start looking at the trade patterns with the US, India enjoys a trade surplus with the US. It's a much more balanced trade. And that is something which always brings the two countries together. Right. India depends on the US for balancing its trade.
This is fascinating, actually. This exchange happened because it shows me the Chinese vision of India in the pecking order of powers in Asia, and how they see the India's journey in development.